What's going on, everybody? Welcome into a special edition, I guess, of the Warchant Report. Don't want to bring down the brand. It'll be back full go for the Miami game, but there's so many questions around the team. Figured we'd get you the folks who know the most. Gene Williams, covering Florida State since 1996. Ira Schoffel, our managing editor, been covering the Noles since 2002. Gentlemen, thanks for being here. This usually is sponsored by our friends at First Commerce Financial. They're still good people. Check them out. Also, next week, Miami week, Friday before the game, check us out over at the Corner Pocket Bar and Grill off Appalachia Parkway. From 6 to 7, Corey Clark and myself will be entertaining you after Jeff Cameron wraps up his show. Maybe give you away some free T-shirts, things like that. And then casino night with special guest bartender William Bar None Floyd goes down from 7 to 11. That, again, going on over at the Corner Pocket Bar and Grill off Appalachia Parkway here in Tallahassee. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me on a crazy week. But you guys are used to it. You've been here through all kinds of weather. With that said, we're taking questions from our subscribers on warchant.com, and I'll go to you first, Gene. The question comes from Non Sequitur. Actually, he's joking around. He says, will this show be in competition with Wake Up Warchant? Who will win the ratings battle? Surely it would be Gene and Ira. So let's get to the first question. Here we go. FSU Noel 12 asks Gene, do you believe there is any truth to the rumors that Willie Taggart isn't truly letting Briles have complete control of the offense? If so, is there any indication that Briles and Clements would leave after the season?
Well, I think when you say complete control, and I go back to even the spring, I think we were at one of those spring events, and somebody asked Willie Taggart about handing over the keys, and he got very defensive about that. So, I don't think he's ever completely turned the offense over. And it's funny that I think Ira and I had the conversation after the game because he was up there and I was on TV, and it looked like Willie Taggart was on the headphones a lot more when FSU was on offense than he normally is. And I asked Ira, was he calling the plays in that game? And, I know there's some reports out there that he was more involved in the Wake Forest game. It looked like he was more involved calling plays, or at least interacting with Kendal Briles during the play calling. So I think it's fair to say he definitely has not given up complete control. He's definitely somewhat involved to the level. I'm not sure we really know that. Could they leave? Absolutely. Kendal Briles is an ascending coach. If he gets the right job offer somewhere, it wouldn't surprise me at all if, he was gone after the season. How much Willie Taggart's interacting with him during games impacts that, I can't say. That's kind of between those guys. But, yeah, I think it's definitely a possibility.
Ira, his offense was chugging along first 3-4 games of the season, especially in the first half. Willie was asked about it point blank on Monday and said it's still Kendal calling the plays. Does it feel like that's still the case for you?
I think it does for the most part. I think that the quarterback play has been pretty poor. I'd say poor. Probably poor is a stretch, but saying he's been playing well has been a stretch as well. I think there's been plays there to be made. They just haven't made them. And, on the topic of Willie interfering, the one thing I would say is I never begrudge a head coach for having input into anything in this program. He's the boss. If Gene comes and tells you that, hey, I don't like something you do on the show, are you going to be like, hey, man, this is my show. I don't want to hear it. Now, the only question would be is if they had a conversation when he came in and Kendal made it clear, hey, I don't want to be discussed. I don't want anything during a game. I don't want to discuss anything during a game. And if Willie said, yeah, that's fine, and then has changed that, then that could be a little bit of an issue. But the whole reality about, whether or not Kendal and Clements stay, we all know it was kind of a rent-a-coordinator situation. It's not like Kendal Briles ever worked with Willie. It's not like he's followed him around his career. This was a situation where Willie needed somebody to help the offense. Kendal was looking for an opportunity. It seemed like a good opportunity. I don't think anybody expected them to be here forever, but if they do leave, it's a bad sign because you're looking at installing something new and or teaching something new for the third year in a row.
Van Jeezy follows up on Warchant, guys, and asks specifically, how is it determined who starts at quarterback? I feel like Willie was asked that a few times on Monday. What do you think, gentlemen, how that is handled?
I would just say I think Willie's making the call. I'm sure he and Kendal are talking about it, but I think Willie is deciding who the quarterback is. I think and again, I don't begrudge that. And if you go back in time to Coach Bowden, every offensive coordinator I think that Coach Bowden had complained about Coach Bowden getting in their way. And I don't know if it was McDuffie, one of the offensive coordinators, famously stormed out of the press box and just came down to the field. And they were calling up the headsets, and he's just not there anymore because he's like, let Coach Bowden call it because I'm done. So it's not that out of the ordinary. But yeah, as far as the quarterback goes, I'm sure if Kendal gets a vote, he probably gets a vote, but I think Willie gets 2 votes. That's my theory.
Fair enough.
No, I totally agree with it. This is obviously 100% Willie Taggart making this decision, really as he should as the head coach in this situation. He's come heck or high water. He's obviously going all in at this point with James Blackman. I know he's not technically naming a starter for Saturday, but it'd be a little odd how defensive he was of James Blackman and then Kendal Briles during his interview. Then suddenly they roll out Hornibrook. It just wouldn't make any sense. So it seems like at this point they've tried a little bit of both quarterbacks. For whatever reason, it seems like at this point they're all in on James Blackman, unless he just completely melts down in the next game or two. I think he's gonna be the guy we're going to see under center for the rest of the season.
I think there'll be plenty more questions along the lines of this one coming from Squiffy Knoll, gentlemen. But he does ask, any chance that Florida State gets desperate enough to give Kendal Briles a 2-year head coach trainee salary and go at it with 9 coaches, several of them new?
Gene?
Yeah.
What is he asking? That whether he's going to be the head coach? Is that what I'm trying to get the gist of that question?
Yeah, to give him a 2-year head coach trainee salary. I don't know if any head coach is going to take just a 2-year deal.
I don't see that's realistic at all. If Florida State does go in a different direction with a coach, I think they're going to bring someone that's a little bit more experienced, running a program, not just a few years as a coordinator. There could be a scenario. Maybe you bring in a defensive-minded coach as a head coach. Maybe they try to keep him on for another year or two if the situation works out well. But I think it's a bit of a stretch to believe that Kendal Briles will be the next head coach here, or at least especially a head coach in training.
Yeah, I've heard a couple scenarios. We hear so many different things. I have heard a scenario where because you're going to have to buy Willie Taggart out, that you say to Kendal, hey, would you take, instead of $4 million a year or $5 million a year like other head coaches would demand, would you take $2 million a year or $2.5 million a year for the first few years until you prove that, and then we'll reward you on the back end. But again, I think the problem for Florida State right now is if they pull the plug on Willie Taggart, which I still think only happens if this thing bottoms out. But if they did pull the plug on Willie Taggart, I think you've got to rebuild the faith of the fan base. And I think people like Kendal Briles, but I think it's still risky hiring a guy who's never been a head coach. I think you'd have to go get a head coach. That's my opinion.
Hey, let's talk about the defense. Doc Candy 15 wants to kind of get your thoughts on this, gentlemen. I guess we'll start with you, Ira. 8 games this season, FSU will face a first-year starter or a backup quarterback. How does our defense not take advantage of that kind of drop-off?
Well, a bunch of reasons. I think a big one is, they just can't pressure the quarterback. And they had some success with that early. But in general, you don't have great pass rushers. As much as everybody likes those 3 defensive linemen, I guess, Robert Cooper, Marvin Wilson, and Corey Durden, they're really defensive tackles. That's what they came to play. And I think that, there's a reason Corey Durden ranks so highly nationally in hurries, because he's not a guy that can actually, he doesn't have the speed to run down quarterbacks. He can beat a lineman and he can get in the backfield, but they have a hard time actually bringing him down. So they're not a great pass rush. They didn't show any pass rush really last week against Wake Forest. So that's one reason. And then on the back end, the secondary hasn't played well. So yeah, those quarterbacks are not. I don't think they played a bunch of world beaters at quarterback, but they don't get a great pass rush, and they don't make a lot of plays in the secondary, and you can make average quarterbacks look a lot better.
Well, I want to chime in. Isn't he also if you had a dynamic group of linebackers, I think that's what could help too. You can have them. You could do some more exotic blitzes with those guys. They're obviously involved a lot in coverage too, and you can make a lot more plays there too. But I think they've recruited so poorly at linebacker the last few years, and I think that's just exacerbating the situation. You got underachieving secondary, no pass rush, and you're just kind of trying to piece some things together at linebacker just to be average. So I think that's thrown in there as well.
How about the health and well-being of the team, Ira? Hogpin asks, any news on how the injured players that needed surgery are doing? Did they have their surgeries? What is their expected recovery time? 13 and 6 were hurt bad. Josh Kando, Jaden Lars would be.
I don't have specifics on how the surgery went, but the orthopedic surgeons they use through TOC and the team doctors are as good as it gets. So I'm sure they went well. I can't remember a surgery really other than maybe like Landon Dickerson. His recovery wasn't great, but usually it goes well. I would, just from what we saw, I think Jaden Lars Woodby is the one I'd be a little bit more concerned about in terms of long term. If it really was, it looks similar to Jacoby McDaniel had something similar like that, and it's a different body type, so you don't know. But it took him over a year. That wasn't just, I think people get that 9 month, 6 month, 9 month with ACLs and some other injuries. Sometimes if it's one of those nasty ankle fracture type things, it can be longer. Kando, I would assume, would be back for next season. But yeah, it's probably too early to know. And I don't, G may know more, but I don't have any specific information about the recoveries.
Nope, we just know those guys are unfortunately gone for the season, and then I think after the season we'll start hearing more about the rehab and how all that's going into the spring.
All right. Second generation Nole asks Gene. Let's kind of a two-part question that then blends into an overall theme. FSU's 2020 schedule, easier or more difficult? FSU's roster in 2020, more or less talented? What both those would mean in terms of consequences of keeping Taggart for 2020.
Well, I think this gentleman if he read what I posted the other day, which I pinned up on the message boards on Warchant, my ramblings and rumblings, he probably knows my answer to this, but that's fine. I can go ahead and discuss it here. I really think the schedule is more difficult next year because first of all, you got to throw a neutral site game against West Virginia. I know they're not great this year, but I'm assuming, haven't really looked at them, they've got a lot of people coming back. So that's obviously going to be an upgrade probably over what you played this year. And then Boise State, who beat you with their freshman quarterback at home. Well, next year you got to go up to that blue field and play. He's going to be a sophomore, and you got to go up there, and that's not an easy place to play. That's going to be a tough game. You've seen how much better Louisville's gotten. You got to go there. I do think the schedule is tougher next year on that end. And look, where would this team be right now with Cam Akers? I mean, he's just beyond a workhorse right now. You take him out of the equation. Where would that defensive line be without Marvin Wilson? And who knows Corey Durden if he's going to be around. I mean, take those guys out of the equation. Where are we without Scary Terry? I mean, that guy every game. I mean, he still, even though he dropped some passes, not one of his better games against Wake Forest, but he did have the long touchdown pass. You take some of those guys out of the equation, it's a little scary next year. I mean, guys step up all the time, and Willie Taggart has recruited well at a couple positions, especially wide receiver. So maybe some of those guys will pick up, but it's hard right now to look at that roster and think it's going to be as good as this year when you lose those guys. And I don't necessarily see guys that immediately jump in that are just as good. Can Laybourne be as good as Akers? Maybe. He's shown some flashes here and there. But, I mean, other than that, man, I don't know. It looks to me like you might be a little off. Maybe you get pretty much your whole offensive line back. Maybe they steadily get a little bit better, especially if Clemens stays here for another year. But, man, I don't know. I think I would have to say that the roster might take a little bit of a hit next year, too.
Ira, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I would just say I agree 100% on the schedule. The only thing I would slightly disagree on the offensive, what the roster looks like is if, Kalen Laybourne's very different from Cam Akers, but he does have a lot of talent. Plus, running back is a position that we all know that you can plug somebody. A guy can have great success as a true freshman. Dalvin Cook obviously did. Cam Akers did. That's a position you don't have to be in the system for a year or two to play running back. If the offensive line is better, to me, that's the key. If the offensive line and quarterback play are better, then everything else functions better. Then you don't have to have a Tamari and Terry. You don't have to have an otherworldly type player or a Cam Akers. I think you've got, if an offense works, they have guys. I mean, they have receivers. They have running backs. They've got a couple kids, really nice running backs committed. So I don't worry as much about that. But I do think the schedule is tougher. And we haven't seen anything to let us know that the program is going to be better. To me, that's the bottom line. If the program is better, then I'm not as worried about the personnel. The program has to get better. That's the big question about Willie Taggart. Will the program be better in 2020?
And I want to chime in there too, because I brought something I didn't really think about too. If you get a transfer from the King kid from Houston, if Jeff Sims signs as we expect with Florida State, and he's one of these freshman quarterbacks that can go right out there and pick things up. I mean, if he's that kind of player, then I think, okay, there's some positions, maybe there's an upgrade in a position like quarterback. But I mean, you put a mobile quarterback, Florida State's so lacked the last few years having that mobile quarterback that seems like 90% of college football has. Just having a guy who can, on those third and eights, can pick up 2 or 3 first downs running the football, can keep plays alive with a bad offensive line. You get that kind of dynamic guy there, quarterback, I think that's good for a few more wins this season.
Next question comes from Crank26. He's just joking around. He says, is the sky falling? But then Seminoles 16 fan follows up with, do you see anything positive about Coach Taggart and this team? Ira, you're the realist. You're not a sky is falling type of guy. I mean, what are some of the positive things that you see from Coach Taggart and this team right now?
To me, the most positive thing has been the fact that they have continued to compete over the last 4 or 5 weeks. I think that was the big question I had coming into the season based on what we saw last year. It looked like those guys kind of cashed in early in that season, and just were not even competitive in a bunch of games late in the season. And part of that was they played better competition, but part of it was they just didn't compete. I thought after the Virginia game, after the ULM game, we might see that. I don't think we really saw that against Virginia. I thought after the Clemson game we might see it. I don't think we really saw that against Wake Forest. They didn't play well, but it didn't look like for a lack of effort. On the flip side of that, somebody else mentioned this in another thread, and I think and I guess it was in response to the article I wrote kind of analyzing Florida State's situation with Willie Taggart, that one of the things that nobody really talks about is, does this team believe? Do they believe in what Willie Taggart's, they haven't quit on him, but do they really believe in him? And I think that's an interesting nuance that we haven't really talked a lot about, because you don't see guys rising, elevating their level of play, playing to a higher level. It's a lot of guys just kind of playing and trying, but not necessarily elevating their play. And I think that has to come from a vision and leadership, and that's a part of coaching we probably don't talk about.
I want to say something too about maybe more of a macro analysis of Willie Taggart, something I think is very positive about what he does, and that's his adaptability. I know Ira has been around a lot of coaches I have over the years, and they're a stubborn bunch. They kind of think it's their way is always the right way, and very few, when things aren't working out, are willing to change. So I give Willie Taggart credit for getting a guy like a Kendal Briles, seeing the offense isn't working, being able to delegate. He's an offensive guy, giving that over to somebody. That's a tough move by a coach to do that. Going out, he obviously did not make a good hire on special teams initially, going ahead and getting rid of that coach and changing some things up there. Say what you want about the special teams, and I know Ricky's had some rough moments, but that's not really the coach's fault so much. I think they've been a lot better there because Willie's been able to adapt. Even it didn't work out, but switching to more of a 3-4 scheme on defense, that was maybe a bad move at the point, hey, things aren't working out. We got to change something up here. So to me, for Willie Taggart to do that, it's a very positive sign, because I think he's going to continue, if this goes beyond 2020 beyond, I think he's going to continue to have to self-evaluate himself and make some more drastic changes to get this thing to work.
Mr. Moderator,
yes, sir.
Can I rebut the rebuttal?
Absolutely.
Oh, yes, please rebut.
No, I agree with you. It is a positive, but like a lot of things, a lot of characteristics, sometimes your positives can be your negatives. And sometimes I wonder if Willie's too quick to adapt and too quick to, okay, that didn't work, let's try this. If you go back to USF, he ran like 3 or 4 different defenses. Here now they're running a new defense this year, or now they're going back and forth. And again, he was a power running offense under Harbaugh, then decides to adapt to the spread, and and then you think back to last season where we're going to go fast, then they had to slow it down, then they went fast again. To me, at some point you have to have some core beliefs too if you're going to get everybody to buy in. So that I think it is a positive, but I think it can be a negative if you're not careful with it.
Well, you guys had mentioned special teams being a little bit better. Maybe a good segue into this next question from Noel Magic. Seems like a foregone conclusion that Harlan Barnett will not be retained after this year. Is Mark Snyder a good coach? Should he be retained? What exactly does he bring to the coaching staff?
You want me to go? I'm happy to go.
Yeah.
I think he's got a nice resume. He's been a defensive coordinator at schools like Texas A&M, Ohio State. He's coached at a lot of football at a lot of high levels. I don't think you'd say from what we've seen so far that he's been a star on this staff, and certainly, I don't think that if they're going to make a change and Harlan Barnett's going to leave, I don't think you're taking somebody from inside the staff and making them the coordinator. I think it's either Jim Leavitt or you go outside. But I think he's a competent coach. Maybe it could be a situation where maybe if he was put in that position, he would rise. And sometimes when people aren't in charge, they kind of work to that level. They know they're not in charge. They're not going to be overly ambitious. But he may be a fine coach. I just can't imagine you take somebody from this defensive staff and elevate them based on what we've seen.
One positive I want to say about Coach Snyder is very few players have improved in the last couple of years, but I'll say one guy that he's worked closely with the last couple of years is Janarius Robinson.
Oh, 100%.
And we've seen the last few weeks. I mean, this guy has improved more. And I remember in recruiting going back and going to Panama City and talking to people there and talking to Michael Langston, our recruiting analyst, about him. And just you could see the body type that this guy looks like an NFL player, but he was as raw as any recruit I've seen at that position. And just to see the transformation now, he's one of the strengths on that defense now, and he was a liability at this point last year. So for him to improve that much, I mean, Coach Snyder has to get some credit for developing a guy to that extent.
I think Odell gets some credit too because they both work with him. But you're 100% right about that. Janarius Robinson it's like a different guy over the last 5 games.
Next question comes from Duo. Are there times when Willie overrides Briles and calls his play instead? Yeah, I think we've heard Ira and Gene touch on that. It certainly is, and that's the case when you're a head coach. You have that ability. He also asks, do you think Willie will give Hornibrook any more chances to play as long as Blackman is healthy? What do you think about that one, Gene? Will we see Alex Hornibrook if James Blackman stays upright?
And I said earlier, I think for the near future, James Blackman's going to be the quarterback going forward. That being said, I really didn't mind what they did a few weeks ago when they got a series, or they planned before Blackman got hurt at a series or two for Hornibrook. I wouldn't be surprised to keep him engaged if maybe that's the case. You bring him out for 1 or 2 series here and there. But I still think Blackman is going to be your quarterback unless he just completely melts down the next game or two. He's going to be your guy.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. The unfortunate thing to me is they did, they went into the Clemson game I guess planning to play both of them. And it's like it didn't work, but I mean, that's not really a fair test, and I think, Hornibrook, we saw some good things. We saw some bad things. I mean, I do think that everybody loves the backup quarterback, and, he did get sacked 8 times in his lone start. That's a concern. And James Blackman, is obviously a little bit, he's developed into a little bit better pocket awareness in terms of avoiding sacks. So I don't think either one's a great choice, but I'm with Gene. It seems like they've decided to ride with James Blackman, which, in fairness to them, a couple weeks ago, I think after the Clemson game, most of us were saying, hey, pick somebody. And he picked somebody. It just may not be the one that most of the fans want to see.
Well, let's keep it with quarterbacks. Chief Seif 24, why does it seem to be a big deal that Hornibrook's arm isn't as strong as Blackman's, yet our 2 best games have come with Hornibrook playing quarterback? Also, what's the point of having a strong arm if you're either overthrowing receivers by 10 yards or underthrowing them by 10 yards? From what I have seen, it looks like Hornibrook throws the deep ball just fine from what he's shown this year. Ira, you're nodding your Gene, go ahead. You seem eager on that one.
I was going to give Corey a hard time because Corey just apparently is obsessed with arm strength because he always loves bringing this up. And whenever I hear about that, I always harken back to a good kid, but Xavier Lee back in the day had the strongest arm I've ever seen by a college quarterback. I don't know if you remember. Ira probably remembers this video we shot of Xavier Lee sitting down or being on his knees and throwing the ball 70-plus yards from that point. And obviously we saw that didn't really work out at a quarterback. And one of the weakest arms I've ever seen is a guy named Danny Werfel, who had a pretty good college career as well. So I don't think I think that's a little overstated, and I agree with him, especially in this system. I think with Kendal Briles, it's getting that ball out quick. I don't necessarily need it. Sure, there's a couple throws he can't make, and maybe, really deep balls, he doesn't have quite the arm, and I do think it's a little overrated. So from that point, again, I've been kind of on the record thinking Hornibrook ought to start, so maybe I'm a little biased in this, but I don't think the arm strength is a huge deal, especially in this offense. The big factor would be is it does make the defense respect the entire field, especially if you're on one hash
It makes them respect, the out on the other hand, on the far sideline. Like, it's kind of an NFL throw. So that to me is a little bit, because it changes how the defense has to defend you, and they can make some educated guesses on what you're not going to be able to do. But overall, yeah, I mean, I also feel like it's not that big of a deal in this kind of offense. And James hasn't hit the deep ball anymore. I mean, he got the one to Terry at the Wake Forest game, but that was supposed to be coming into the year. Oh, that's the one thing you're going to have with Blackman, and he is I forgot his name, the guy who asked the question, or lady who asked the question. It's been a lot of overthrows or underthrows. It just has. The timing hasn't been there. James hasn't played with confidence. People aren't being unfair when they criticize James for the way he's played. He's missed a lot of big throws.
Let's see here. Next question comes from Bogeyman. Bogeyman over on the Warchant.com message boards on the Tribal Council kind of wants to know a breakdown of the financials of Florida State's current state and the real possibility of the buyout. I think this explanation can help the Warchant fan base understand the situation FSU is currently in realistically. Gene, you're our boss, so you're really good when it comes to money. The financials of FSU's current state, so if I understand it, he would be owed 85% of his remaining contract, so at this point it'd be a little bit over $17 million. They would have the remainder of the term to pay it off, which would be 4 years if they parted ways at the end of this season. That's a big sum of money. People can't seem to wrap their heads around $17 million being a lot of money. It's a lot of money, and this school isn't exactly flush with cash right now. It doesn't seem like.
No, it's definitely not. Matter of fact, you asked about financials. It's about as bad as it's ever been for this athletic department, which goes hand in hand when you lose. I know I wrote the story, I think, before the season about the drop in ticket sales, and it's been pretty dramatic the last few years. And what goes hand in hand with that are booster contributions, concessions, licensing from sales of everything. I mean, a lot of this stuff adds up. So you're talking tens of millions of dollars below, what you expected to bring in. So that obviously, has to be factored into this whole thing. And you mentioned the 17, you throw in the assistant coaches, because you got to expect the new coach is going to come in. You got to get rid of those guys. So now you're over 20 million. Then you have to pay for the new coach. So there's a lot of money we're talking about here. But here's the thing, and this is one benefit. You don't really have a athletic director with a ton of athletic experience, but you got a guy who knows the books, knows financials, and David Coburn. The other side of this coin is how much money is FSU losing right now? If you believe, and again, we all have to go into the assumption, if you're thinking about a buyout, that you don't believe in this coaching staff, that it's not going to improve. If that's honestly your belief, then you got to start adding up the numbers. Well, how much is FSU losing here? How much is it going to lose next year compared to how much it's going to cost you to buy out a coach? I don't know what those numbers are, but David Coburn does. I mean, if it's strictly a financial thing and he looks at that, maybe that's what it is. Because while 17, 20 million, whatever that is, you add up this year and next year, you're probably somewhere in the same ballpark, give or take $5-10 million. I know it's a lot of money. So yeah, that's definitely in there. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts to the financial aspect of this, and it's not simple to just say, oh, just buy them out. But one other thing I want to throw out too, those buyouts are usually negotiated. I don't think you're paying every single dime of that. It's going to be negotiated down a little bit on that too. And I do think, and I've even heard some rumblings, I'm not reporting this or anything specific, but I've heard there's some big boosters that have been willing to chip into that. So all that money wouldn't necessarily come out of the school's coffers, for instance. So it may not quite be that 20 plus million that we're all throwing around right now. Maybe it ends up being, who knows, 13, 14 million, whatever. It's still a big chunk of change. So hopefully Ira can write that check.
Yeah, it's a big deal. It is a big deal. It's a lot of money. And, I think you look at the nice thing is it doesn't, as Gene said, it's not going to come out of your operating budget. I mean, they're already having to cut corners as it is. They're not going to have to, if they pay that buyout, it's not like they're going to have to tell the baseball team, hey, sorry, you're not getting new uniforms or something. And it's not coming out of operating expenses, but that money, it's coming from somewhere. And it's money that could have been donated to a different project. If boosters or the Seminole boosters come forward and say, okay, we can pay it, they can pay it if they have to, but it doesn't mean you want to pay it. It's a bad situation. I mean, this is to have this crisis in terms of if this coaching staff fails at the time that they're in financially right now. And they feel like the picture, I do want to say, and Gene mentioned that story I wrote a couple months ago, they do feel like the picture is going to get a lot better in a year or two. Once the ACC network money starts coming in, they've also had some one-time hits financially that they're getting past. So I think in a year or two, they feel like they're going to be on much better financial footing. But again, just as you start digging out, it's like in your home budget, if you feel like, oh, we're almost there, and then your air conditioner goes out, and you got to get a new air conditioner. I mean, they don't need this kind of expense just when they're trying to dig out of this hole.
This question seems a bit relevant. Comes from Goodnoll. Asks, when does the pain of an empty stadium and the financial reality of lost ticket revenue become the deciding factor? Gene, I mean, I think you kind of touched upon that. There's, several things that obviously weigh in here, but I mean, is it a critical point? Is it going to be a critical mass? I guess if they lost to Miami, then the stadium against Alabama State would just be absolutely horrific in terms of just the amount of empty seats. Like, does this year feel like a flashpoint to where if the attendance is that bad and the ticket sales slow down that much, that it could be the deciding factor, a deciding factor?
I think I mean, it's a significant factor. Obviously, that's the fuel that gets the engine going. It's the attendance. That goes hand in hand with ticket sales, booster contributions, everything else. When you see that thing not being very full, it definitely has an impact. And I see, at the end of the game, David Coburn and John Thrasher are usually down in the field, and they look in the stadium. They see what you and I see, and they see more and more empty seats out there. And I'll go back to 2009. I think wasn't it that Maryland game where they had those jerseys where they looked like the Atlanta Falcons, and it was Mickey Andrews' going away party. And that place was half empty, and that really had an impact on a lot of people. They saw that like it kind of was a reality check, and I think that might have been the impetus to start the transition to get Coach Bowden out of there, because of what was happening there in the stands. And I think we could start to see that now, like you especially pointed out. If they were to lose to Syracuse and or Miami, then I think as bad as it's been this season, it could really drop off at the end. So I think it is a significant factor. It's not the end-all be-all factor. There's still a lot of things in play here. We mentioned all the different moving parts with financials. It may be a situation with the coaching staff. What happens the last couple of games? If they go out and they do that and they beat Florida, and I know that seems like a long shot, well, then everything's fine. Basically, you end the season doing something like that, or maybe even playing really competitive down there to the end of the game. Maybe that's enough of a positive influence going to the offseason. So it is a significant factor, but to me, it's not the end-all, be-all.
Ira, Gene mentioned it. President John Thrasher, Athletics Director David Coburn, they're on the field on home games. They're looking around. In speaking to them over the course of the last year or so, do you feel that they really, that kind of strikes a visceral chord with them when they do look around and don't see Doak Campbell Stadium filled up the way it has been in the past?
I think it does, but I think what gives them a more visceral feeling or emotion is when they look at the spreadsheets and they look at the revenue that's not coming in. When you think about every seat, a season ticket costs well over $300 for just the average seats are over $300, and then you talk about the booster contribution that comes with it, so you can get a parking spot, concessions, all those things. You're talking about a lot of money per seat for every one seat. Now you multiply that by 30,000 people. The season tickets, 10 years ago, or 5 years ago, season tickets 5 years ago, they sold over 40,000 season tickets. This year, I think it's under 25,000. So you're 15,000 seats. All that money, that multiple is gone. And then, the other side of it is it's harder now than ever to get people to come to games because of the home viewing experience and everything else. So you can't have a bad product. You can't give fans any reason to not come, and that's a big reason to not come. So that does create pressure, but at the same time, I don't know that you can let the fans just have the total vote. The fans decide, hey, we're not coming to the game. You got to fire your coach, or we're not coming. You can't let them run the program. You have to decide. There are a lot of other variables, as Gene said. It's not just that, but it's a big one. It may be the biggest one, but I don't think it's, I don't think it's the whole reason.
Here we got a question actually about the football team and the actual sport of football, but it's an elephant, but you have to go one bite at a time. But feel free to pick out what you guys want to answer from this one. It comes from Deb Knoll. Would like you guys to discuss player execution more in depth, as in where is the line between coaching responsibility and player responsibility. Most of what I've heard from the Warchant Brain Trust, love you guys, is execution is about coaching, but where does player accountability come into the equation? I also understand that if players continue to make poor execution choices, then they need to be off the field. But doesn't that assume there are other players who demonstrate better execution? What if the backups are inconsistent or not developing or need more time to develop? Example, the offensive line. Is that coaching too? We all know that there were problems on this team before Willie got here. It seems to me that the accountability should be shared across the board, coaches and players. You're nodding your head because you're still up on my screen right here, Ira. Let it rip, man.
Yeah, no, I actually, after that game, I didn't write a 3-2-1 because I got so kind of wrapped up in that other piece I wrote, the analysis piece. But in my 3-2-1, one of my main takes was going to be, hey, man, this is a game that was on the players as much as anybody else. I mean, and I'm not talking about Ricky Aguayo's missed field goal. I don't think he should have been put in that position. I think that was a poor choice by the coaching staff. But, Cam Akers can't put the ball on the ground there. You just can't. And you talk about fighting for extra yards, and that's not the time where you fight for extra yards. He was going down to the ground, just go down, protect the football. And that's the second time now. I'm not, again, Cam Akers is great, and he's a big part of the reason they've had any success that they've had. But that's 2 games now that you pretty much – you win the Boise State game if he doesn't fumble because you're going in. You're probably going to go up by 3 scores in the second half of that game. And then this is a situation where you go up by 2 scores if you get a touchdown there. So I just think it's Cam Akers and then Tamarian Terry, again, in that game was – it was a poor performance from him. I mean, he's got to make those catches, a third down catch. I mean, if you think you're an NFL receiver and he thinks he's a big time, I mean, I think he thinks he's a first round kind of guy. That wasn't the guy we saw on Saturday. And it really hasn't been the guy we've seen a lot of this year. He's run some wrong routes. The play against Virginia that we all killed Willie for and Kendal Briles for at the end of the game, rushing up and running that play, I think looked like Tamarian's the guy that's not lined up where he's supposed to be. He wasn't even supposed to be there. So, this is. I agree with her to a degree. Personal player accountability is something that we a lot of times we excuse, but it's and how you determine that I think is based on how much experience a guy has and his talent level. If they put you in position to make a play, you got to make the play. The 3rd and 10 long run that the Wake Forest running back had, that's on the players. That's not on the coaches. Get the guy down on the ground. Don't So there's some of it. And I think we probably err on blaming coaches because they get paid.
Fair enough. Gene, player accountability, coaching accountability, execution, how does that sort of factor in? The things you saw against Wake Forest, was it more of a coaching thing or more of a player onus?
Well, I definitely agree with Deb Knoll that I think you need to spread it all around. It's definitely not 100% on the coach. As Ira said, there's definitely some player. You can point to a lot of instances where it just comes down to a player making a play. You talk about a team like Wake Forest, you're athletically better than that guy that you need to bring down to stop the third down, and you don't do it. I mean, that's on the player not doing that. And it really and a lot of this, we're seeing this in these games, and people keep wanting to say, well, they're closer, they're not getting blown out in these games. Well, when's the last time they actually won a game late? I think maybe that Boston College game last year. Really, let's go back at the Louisville game. I mean, they ran into the kicker, the quarterback threw a interception right to the guy. It's more like Louisville lost that game. This team, these players in crunch time, I don't know what's going on with them and how much you blame coaching and how much you blame these players for pressing, but obviously not just, we've talked about James Blackman. I mean, for Cam Akers, to do what he did to Terry, to drop those passes at key moments, that your leaders of this team are not executing at the most important moments in the game. So yeah, that's on both coaching and players, in my opinion.
Okay. Next question comes from T-Mac. T. McGrady 1 on the Tribal Council. It could possibly be Tracy McGrady, everybody. We haven't confirmed it, but we can't deny it either. This is a long one. This is probably at least 600 words, but let me just flesh right to it right here. Basically, he even says, I guess my question is, could you still see the administration making a change if the team finishes 7-5 this season, but gets blasted in Gainesville? I think we have seen enough and better to do it now. Basically, his thing is that he just doesn't see Willie turning things around. With 7-5, could they make a change at 7-5? You've improved by 2 games. It'd be hard to tell a guy you got to leave after that, I guess, right?
Yeah, I think 7-5, they're not making a change. I think they want anything possible at this point. If there's any signs of progress, I don't think they're making a change. We discussed all the hurdles that have to be jumped, all the financial things, a lot of other things in play here. So I think 7-5. I think there's not going to be a change. Probably at that point you probably beat Miami at least. I think that's going to be. We've talked about it for a couple of weeks now. That game keeps staring at me over and over again. That Miami game, how important that game is to this program. I think you're going to beat Syracuse. I don't know if we're going to give our predictions at the end since we're not doing a report. I think they beat Syracuse, especially if DeVito can't go. I feel really good about FSU's chances this Saturday. But, man, that Miami game, this is not a good Miami team. They just lost to the worst team in the ACC. You've got them at home. You haven't beat a rival yet under Willie Taggart. They absolutely have to win that game. If they don't win that game, then you're looking at a 6-6 or maybe even a 5-7 type season. At that point, if they have a Miami hangover and go lose up at Boston College, which would be very possible under that scenario, you finish 5-7. I think that's the area. If you get in that 5-7, you've lost to Miami, you lose to BC, you get blown up by Florida. Then I think the administration's back is almost against the wall where they might feel they have to make a move at that point. So that's the scenario. I think it's a little bit unlikely to happen, but it's definitely in the realm of possibility.
Yeah, and I would agree with everything Gene said. The only thing I would say is if they're 6-6 and they go to a bowl game, I think it's going to be really difficult, and I wrote about it in that piece. I think it's really difficult to have made the case publicly that Florida State did, that Willie Taggart inherited a mess, that he came into a program that needed a lot of work behind the scenes to build it back. And if he makes a bowl game in his second year, I think it's hard to see where you fire that guy. I think it would be a bad look. At the same time, if David Coburn and the people who make these decisions, the higher ups, they're at practices, they're in the locker room after games, they're in the meeting room, they're talking to all the players and assistant coaches, and they've got a lot more information than any of us do. If they decide this guy is not the guy we thought, he's not going to get it done, we know it's going to look bad, but we have to make a change, that would take some big cojones, but that's the only way I can see it happening. I mean, if they just know, it's not a matter of because sometimes coaches get fired because the fans want them to. Sometimes coaches get fired because the boosters want them to. They get phone calls all the time. You got to get rid of that guy, and emails. And this wouldn't be that kind of case. This would be a case where they just say, we have no confidence in him as the head coach. Now, I'm not saying that's where they're going to be, but that's the only way I could see him being fired if they go 6-6. If they make a bowl game, as Gene said, I think that he's going to stay. But it's still an if. I don't know that Syracuse is a guaranteed win. Miami's certainly not a guaranteed win. And if they go 4-8 or 5-7, yeah, I think they're going to have to. I think there's a good chance they'll have to make a change.
Right. Hey, one other scenario I'm kind of curious to throw out to you guys. One other factor, and if that, let's just say that 6-6, like Ira said, he probably stays. It's a little bit of a limbo. How important would the recruiting class be at that point? Because let's say they've started to deteriorate a little bit. Look, I'm not saying anything is going on. They may keep every guy committed. They may get some more guys. But I'm just throwing out a hypothetical. What if, before that, they get blown up by Florida and Jeff Sims comes out and decommits and says he's going to the Gators or something like that? At that point, do you say, like, look, can we afford this? Because if this recruiting class falls apart at 6-6, you're going to have a coach whose seat's going to be nuclear next year. What's going to happen to that recruiting class? So, I mean, there's some other things in play here besides just financials, besides just attendance, but besides the record. There's so many moving parts in this thing that I think especially in that limbo range, that might dictate what happens.
That's a good point.
Hey, we've got some rapid-fire-esque questions. We got about 5 minutes left here. I mean, it kind of dovetails into what you guys were talking about here just a second ago. From Me 4 asks, how many wins does Florida State need to save the recruiting class?
I think 7, Ira mentioned earlier. I think if you hit 7, you show some momentum. You're going to a bowl. That means you probably would have beaten a rival in Miami. And that South Florida, I mean, it does mean something. You're still recruiting those kids down there against Miami. So you can show we're on the way up and Miami's on the way down. That means that Florida can't get everybody, especially when they've got a goober coach. You're going to be able to out-recruit them sometimes. So, I mean, winning that would be important. 7 wins would show the momentum you need. Is it going to be a great class of 7 wins? Probably not, but it might be good enough to show progress.
Yeah, I think these coaches can sell, but they have to have something to sell. And 7-5 is it. Yeah, anything below that, it's going to be really difficult.
Okay. Next question comes from Texan Noel. Did the administration restrict Willie Taggart in the amount of money he could pay for offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator positions when he was first hired? Is this the reason we did not get Jim Leavitt and Cristobal?
First of all, I mean, Jim Leavitt got paid a fortune at Oregon. I mean, when you say did they restrict it, there's no way in any situation, you have to decide whether or not you're willing to pay something. It's not a matter of can you pay it, but whether or not you're willing to pay it. And Oregon made a huge commitment to Jim Leavitt, and so I think that was probably part of it. But I also think they paid Harlan Barnett $1 million a year. That's not a low-paid defensive coordinator. That's a pretty high-paid. It's not Brent Venables' territory, but it's in the top probably 20, top 15 or 20 nationally paid defensive coordinators, and that's probably where Florida State wants to be. That was over, and again, that's $1 million. That's way more than Charles Kelly got, and Charles Kelly got way more than the previous defensive coordinator. So Florida State has kept up with the Joneses. This myth, there's a myth that Florida State won't pay at all. They're not going to be at the top of the list, but they don't really want to be at the top of the list.
A&M's at the top of the list, and how's that working out for them?
Yeah. Good point, Gene. Next question comes from Flavanol. If you had to bet FSU football next plays in the ACC Championship game, would it be A, 1 to 2 seasons, B, 3 to 4 seasons, or C, 5 or more? I choose playing in the title game as the ultimate barometer of our program's success. Ira, will it be 1 to 2 years, 3 to 4, or will it take a half decade or even more to get back to lovely Charlotte, the Queen City?
They still play that game? I forgot. I lost. It's funny because for years, we literally, we could never plan anything for early December. And I'd forgotten about that because, you always just assumed in early December you're going to be going to Charlotte. And obviously it's been a long time. If I had to pick a number, I'd say 3 to 4. I don't see, it's almost impossible to see a 1 to 2 scenario, and you'd like to think it won't take 5 years because part of it is I think Clemson's going to dip at some point, right? They have to dip at some point. They have to. So
I'm sure somebody in the state of Alabama said the same thing about 8 years ago.
That's exactly what I was thinking. I'm like, are they Alabama? If they become Alabama, it might be the answer might be C or D. None of the above. I don't know. But, I would say in 3 or 4, I think they were going to be competitive, I think, with 3 or 4 to get to that. Because the Clemson, we don't know how that – if Clemson stays, we're going to be – I don't see FSU getting to that point in the next 3 or 4 years. But, I think within that point, they should be able to at least be competitive for it.
Who's going to beat them? Florida State was the only team in the ACC kind of keeping them, at the gates, if you will, and we're asleep at the wheel, so Clemson's going to keep romping around, it feels like, in the interim. Let's see another question here. Brooklyn Knoll 3 wants to know about moving somebody over, it looks like. Ira, is there a possibility of Malcolm Lamar moving to offensive tackle? There have been a few past players at practice and on the sidelines who have the same body type. Say maybe Cam Irving. They believe he can make the switch and start sooner than later.
I've seen a couple of people speculate about that. I don't know. It's worth considering because he's not necessarily moving up the depth chart on the defensive line that fast, and he's got looking at him physically, he's got a good body for it. Willie Taggart's got a pretty good track record of moving guys to positions historically, and so I think he'd consider it. But I also think they're excited about Darius Washington. I think that he showed some potential when he got to play this past week. He's only a freshman. I think the future's bright for him. And they do have they've got a couple other young guys that I think have potential to compete at offensive tackle. It wouldn't shock me if they looked to move somebody over, but I don't know why they wouldn't have done it already if they were going to, because they've known they were going to have an issue at that position for a while.
Let's go to the last question. We're creeping closer to the hour mark. And everybody's got other things they want to do, I'm sure. Not us. We want to sit here and answer questions all day, but we know we only have a limited amount of your valuable attention. St. Bobby has a 2-part question. I'll go to the first one. I think I'm closer to being a fan than you guys are because I haven't been involved in the day-to-day operations of covering the beat as long. So this is probably the question I would like to get your guys' opinion on. I'll start with you, Gene. What is the general consensus or viewpoint within the athletic department in regards to Taggart's work ethic, organizational skills, and overall approach to the job? Concern, I don't know if St. Bobby's saying his concern or what he's gleaned is he might be a bit disorganized and or lackadaisical compared to his peers in similar high-profile coaching jobs with similar high-profile compensation.
Well, first of all, we're not in the. I can't speak for David Coburn or any of the people over there what they feel about this. So I mean, I don't know how educated I can really answer that. I'd say the lackadaisical thing is more. I think people are misinterpreting Willie Taggart's demeanor and body language. Every coach has a different style. I think just being used to maybe what Jimbo Fisher was such a different personality type, it doesn't mean he's lackadaisical because he doesn't jump up and down on the sideline and scream at officials and get carried away in press conferences. So I don't know about that. I will say, and the one thing on there, I think organizational skills has been an issue since he came to Florida State. I think he made some bad hires maybe on that side of the ball. Some of that's changed a little bit since then. He got some guys out, some new guys in. But I mean, that is, I think, one of his weaknesses is the ability to organize and take care of a lot of those details. And I think before, when he's at Oregon, we're going back to, kind of what happened with Levitt, Cristobal, and those guys there. I think that a lot of those guys took care of those, kind of detailed things for him, where he was maybe a bigger picture guy. He came to Florida State, short time frame with the early signing period. Oregon decides to keep all those coaches. He was scrambling. So I think some of that was just misfortune, the way things worked out for him. But I do admit, I don't think organization is one of his strengths.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And to add to it, I think attention to detail is something that, when somebody is super focused on it, we call them a micromanager. And we used to rip Jimbo for, micromanaging the position coaches and just kind of meddling or just being on top of every little detail. But the plus side to it was very, very few things kind of slipped under the cracks. I think sometimes he lost the big picture. I think sometimes Jimbo lost focus on the big picture because he was so focused on every little detail. And Willie, I think, is more of a big picture, 3,000-foot view kind of guy and doesn't have that great attention to detail. Well, that's fine, but you've got to have a great staff around you, not just the coaches, but the support staff. And I think that's something that's been lacking. The other thing I would say, and I think St. Bobby probably talks to some people in the athletic department, because I've heard some of that chatter as well about, how much time are they putting in, those types of things. One thing that Willie Taggart did, and, I think I can see why he did it, but he really kind of closed ranks around their staff. I think from the standpoint of you want to keep the people, keep your circle tight and really keep in the people who you trust and not necessarily let the world in. I think when Jimbo Fisher left, he had kind of pushed a lot of people out. So I think people felt like, okay, Willie Taggart's going to embrace everybody with open arms. Let's all go hang out in the coaches' offices. Let's go all spend a lot of time up on the third floor. And he really kind of closed that down, closed ranks. Some of the people that used to be kind of welcome to kind of be part of the crew are not anymore. So I think there's some feeling around the department, of kind of what's going on in there. They don't know. They're not seeing him. They're not getting a full picture, up close of pictures they used to. So that leads to skepticism. And then when the results aren't good on the field and you see things not being buttoned up, I think people are jumping to the assumption that, maybe they're just not putting in the hours. Maybe they're not working the way the Jimbo staff did. So I think that's all part of it. I think at the end of the day, though, if you win, Steve Spurrier famously did not work hard, and he won a lot of football games. There's different ways to do it. But if you don't have success, if you lose, people are going to find every reason to explain why you're losing. And I think that's just one, that's one of the, put another one on the pile that people have determined that's why he's not having success.
All right, good stuff, guys. That's a wrap on this. Gene will have his full matchup analysis and prediction up on Warchant. I think he already kind of let a spoiler out there. Ira, real quick, Florida State beat Syracuse. I think it's a 10.5-point spread last time I saw. I think Florida State wins comfortably. Syracuse is really poor this season.
Well, they're really poor on offense. They're decent on defense. To me, it's going to be key. I think Florida State's going to win, but the offense has to play better. James Blackman has to play better. Tamari and Terry has to play better. They're going to need to do something against a pretty good Syracuse defense. Syracuse is not going to let them just go up and down the field. They're going to have to make plays. But if they do that, they should win and maybe even win comfortably, because Syracuse offense, their offensive line, is really a mess.
Does Ira know what he's talking about, Gene? Is Syracuse good on defense, not so good on offense?
Yeah, it's funny. I was just, before we got on, I was kind of working on that thing. And I was surprised when I went and started looking at their defensive line. It's actually pretty good. They've got a couple really good players on there that have put up some good numbers, especially at the two end positions, which is kind of scary going up against Florida State's offensive tackles. But if there's a line in the ACC that might be as bad as Florida State on offense, it's Syracuse. Their offensive line is horrific. And for me, I think it's so important for them, for DeVito to play. And I don't know if we have an update since I checked this morning on his status, because his replacement is a 6'5", I think he's 240-pound statue with that offensive line. I know Florida State's usually not very good against the rushing the passer, but this guy is a statue. And they should be able to just tee off on this guy. So I think that'll be a big advantage where DeVito he's not as crazy mobility, but he can definitely move around a little bit. So I think that'll be a key to this game. So I think in terms of a pick, and I'll give my pick a little bit later in the matchup analysis, but if DeVito plays, I think FSU wins, but I don't know if they cover that spread. If DeVito doesn't play, I like FSU by a couple touchdowns.
All right. It's homecoming, folks. Go ahead, Ira.
Just to follow up real quick. I don't think Syracuse can win this game on offense, but I think Florida State could lose this game on offense if they let Syracuse make some big plays, some scoop and score, strip sacks, things like that. Florida State's offense has to come to play. I don't know that I have enough confidence in Florida State's defense, even against a bad offense, to make big plays and score on defense and things like that. Florida State's offense, they really have to play this. I mean, it's a game they should win, but if they lose it, they could certainly lose it on offense too.
I mean, they can't lose to Syracuse. I mean, they lose to Syracuse. Good grief.
We're doing an emergency. An emergency.
Pretty much. That bowl thing is going probably the way of the dodo. All right, it's going to be a homecoming game, 3:30 kickoff. Also, folks, Saw Talk, check that out. They'll be going down an hour and a half before kickoff. Chris Hope and Peter Warwick will be the guest speakers at the Saw Talk event. And keep it dialed in and locked into warchant.com. Gene's matchup analysis, game predictions will be going up, I'm sure. Corey's probably working on something great over in Atlanta for all of us to enjoy. Gene, thank you for your time as always, boss man. Ira,
hey, absolutely.
Good seeing
Let me
you
throw
again.
this out there. While we were talking, I got a text from Bar None.
Okay.
That it looks like now, you just mentioned Peter Warwick, remind me, it looks like he will also be a celebrity bartender a week from Friday at the Corner Pocket. And this all goes to William Floyd's charity, Bar One Foundation for Underprivileged Children. So, I mean, you come out for a good cause, too. So, man, bar none, Peter Warwick back there. I think I've even heard Jeff Cameron may even celebrity bartend. Imagine that. Ooh. So it should be a good time there.
All right.
I might celebrity drink. If that helps.
Corey will be there.
Your Nick Ultras.
Yeah. We'll all be there. Gene will be there. Ira will be there. Corey and myself as well. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you over on warchant.com.
Your home is one of the most valuable assets you will ever purchase in your lifetime. As a pure mortgage broker, our goal is to provide our clients with the best options surrounding that purchase decision. Whether you're looking to purchase a new home or refinance an existing home, First Commerce Financial provides 5-star service while saving you thousands of dollars along the way. If you are in Florida, call me at 248-207-2404 or reach us at www.firstcommercefinancial.com.